welcome everyone to the panel. So we're going to start with introductions. So just going to ask everybody as we go down the line to sort of briefly introduce themselves and a little bit about their fund. We have an interesting group here in that we've got a representative from academic venture capital, from corporate venture capital, and from institutional venture capital. And I think we'll find that there's a lot of overlaps and some differences as to how each of these funds operate. So I'm Roger Kitterman. I'm the managing partner of the Mass General Brigham Ventures, and I'll pass it along to you for your introduction.
Yeah, I'm Hyung Chun, partner at Foresite Capital. Great to meet you.
Greeting. How's everyone doing? Yeah, thank you, Robbie. I've planted some people in the audience, and we'll call on them later. So Jason Hafler, Sanofi Ventures.
And Meredith Fisher, partner at Mass General Brigham Ventures.
Great. So maybe if each of you could start with a little bit of background on your fund, just so people have an understanding of where you fit into the venture ecosystem and how you work a little bit. So let's just go down the line here.
Sure. So Foresite Capital is a healthcare dedicated investment fund with about $3.5 billion under management. Currently investing out of our sixth fund that closed last summer. And we're broadly stage and indication agnostic. I think about half of our investments are Series B or earlier, but we also invest in publicly traded companies, about 20-30% of our portfolio being in the public space. Predominantly on the therapeutic side, about 70% on therapeutic investments, but also investing in healthcare services as well as life sciences and platform.
So what are we?
Yeah, as a fund, sort of what's your, a little bit of background, what do you invest in, those kinds of things?
Yeah. So I work for a large pharmaceutical company, Sanofi, and our ultimate goal is to focus on patients. So we invest in things, so who here, entrepreneurs, CEOs, so raise your hand if you're a CEO, entrepreneur, biotech, great, academic, great. Have you ever talked to a VC and they say, we love what you're doing, come back with more data? Probably never. So that's what we like to do. So we work for big pharma. So instead of the answer, which is come back with more data, we invest into companies. Act like the really wonderful Foresites and MGBs, you'll hear more about them, but we act like institutional investors and really try to bridge that gap between what data is going to get a big pharma interested to partner or acquire. We're evergreen as a structure. So we act again like institutionals, and our ultimate goal though is to bring medicines to patient for our parent company. And we've been doing this for about 15 years.
Thanks. Meredith?
I think we're about 15 years old as well, just about getting our driver's license. So Mass General Brigham Ventures is, as the name suggests, the venture arm of Mass General Brigham. I think important to know that we are solely focused on investing in and oftentimes even being part of creating companies spun out of the MGB system. So we enter into investments in the earliest stages. We often work alongside academics and entrepreneurs to get those companies started ahead of even writing a check. We focus broadly simply because our research base is very broad as well. So used to be before Mass Eye and Ear came in, we were maybe shoulders, knees, and toes, and now we're head, shoulders, knees, and toes, meaning that all indications, all modalities, et cetera, on the therapeutic side are in scope for us, as well as also opportunities in health tech, in devices, diagnostics, et cetera. We must have the MGB bent to it in order for us to examine or consider an investment. But at the end of the day, it's also important to understand that we, like the other two, my other two colleagues up here, are interested in returns. So we are a venture fund that is looking to make venture-like returns. We just fish out of a very well-stocked and exciting pond that hopefully you guys are getting to hear about in other parts of the conference.
And I should say, sorry.
Of course.
For us, we are strategic, but one of the things I found in being at this company, my parent company for 12 years, is if you invest in great teams with great science, solving unmet needs for patients at the right price, then you can have a nice balance of a strategic investor, which is what we're focused on, with also making smart financial bets.
Nice, and I should mention that I have this magic iPad here so that if anyone has questions for the panel at any point, just feel free to go on the app and you can submit the questions, and I will see it here. So hopefully we can get some questions along the way. So we've done a couple of deals with Foresite. I think we've done at least one deal with Sanofi Ventures. Sanofi, the corporate, has acquired one of our companies as well. So maybe Hyung, if you could start with just sort of talking about an example of how you work with academia, whether it's us or others, and in the context of maybe having a venture fund, not having a venture fund, just some example like that.
Yeah, I mean, it's been a real pleasure working with the MGB Venture Group on one of our recent investments that was made about a year and a half ago. And we, ever since then and even before then, we keep in close touch with MGB Group to look at other opportunities. And I think kind of broadly speaking, Foresite has been more later stage investments. In terms of our investment portfolio has been more later stage, but more recently we've been looking at earlier stage companies. The one particular investment we made was a seed stage company that was incubated out of Foresite Labs in collaboration with MGB. And I think kind of in that particular situation, and in other situations, I think having great conviction in the founding team, the academic co-founder, and the therapeutic area that we're looking at, and kind of modality and such. A lot of pieces came together very well to make that investment. And certainly we're looking at other opportunities in working with the MGB Group with other potential academic collaborations. So it's been a great experience to work with the group here.
Great, thanks. I think one of my partners refers to Sanofi investing in one of our companies as unlocking. So we'd love to hear
your partner. We like that.
I'd love to hear your perspective on that.
So I mean, look, I'll take a step back and say we're hugely appreciative of the work that MGB Ventures has done, especially in this current environment. We're supporting phenomenal academic research, being able to do a lot of the heavy lifting, right? As you look at the number of deals, and again, we can see how many deals you look at, they see a lot, and they spend a lot of time mentoring, supporting terrific academics to try to then get them ready to be institutionalized and for traditional venture, later stage venture to go into them. So we're greatly appreciative of the partnership, and I can think of multiple companies at Curo. We've done Steve Greenberg, I saw him walking around the halls. David Ting, we invested in Rome. So we have lots of examples of the importance of MGB has done to be able to go and bring that first part of the company creation ideation ready for institutionals or groups like where I work, Sanofi Ventures in.
Great. And Meredith maybe is sitting on the inside. You do a lot of company creation really from the ground up. Sometimes you're the interim CEO for a period of a while. So maybe just, we have a one case example, just talk about sort of how it all comes together in a way that might be helpful.
Yeah, I'll take one that we started a few years back. And unfortunately, it's not going to be with you two, but with an institutional and a strategic. We were looking at something in a very hot space that we thought had a really exciting set of data, all the way through to non-human primate studies, which is fairly rare for us. And that's all terrific. But at the end of the day, what was the most enabling of that company aligning and actually coalescing was our ability to actually engage with a strategic venture fund, which could really take a look at that data package with an academic lens as well as a pharma lens and say, this is actually, albeit early, incredibly exciting, and we're interested in participating. And then an institutional fund who really had been looking incredibly broadly at the space and interested in making a move in this area to say, terrific, we've got amazing originating IP and a strong academic package. We have a strategic who has come in and sort of given us the blessing, as it were, around their view of the data, and that all fits with actually our thesis as well as wanting to get in early and actually sort of be active in this space. And so literally the three, those three entities, ourselves and the other two VCs, came in, formed the company, and then invested in it and actually started kind of running it through the early stages. We built out the team, et cetera. So I think that speaks to a really great opportunity when you can align all three of the verticals that we have here across the venture space to not just recognize the opportunity, but diligence, coalesce, and also balance each other, both in forming that syndicate as well as also then actually helping to operationalize the company. I think those are the types of things that I think disproportionately benefit our companies when we get started with them, because of all those three unique perspectives as well as expertise that were at the table literally from day -1. And so far so good as well.
Great, thanks. So maybe stepping out a little bit, I'm sure people have questions about just the investment environment. As some people know, it's been a pretty difficult venture investment environment for probably the last 3 years or so now, but deals are still getting done. So as you think about the lens that you've been looking at more recently, has it changed? What type of deals do you think are the ones that are getting done now and that are more likely to be successful in the current venture capital environment?
I mean, look, like you probably are living it now if you're trying to raise money. This is one of the hardest times we've experienced in, I would say, the past at least decade. Now, these things come and go, but if you look at the data, 2015, 2016, $9-10 billion was raised to invest in life sciences. That ramped up to about $41 billion, 2021, 22, 23. This year, $3 to $5 billion was raised. This is a tough environment, not just because VCs are careful what they're putting, how they're deploying capital, but there's also been this bifurcation around how funds, what their mandate is, right? So if you look at a group that does company creation, they do it all in-house. So I feel like there's been a little bit of a gap in the typical seed to Series A to what we would have thought about what is venture capital from 10, 20 years ago. And so right now, I think a lot of groups want de-risk. If you look what's getting done, de-risk late-stage assets with teams that have done this many times before.
Yeah, and I would echo that sentiment from our side as well. I think assets that are close to IND filing, say a year to 18 months, I think seem quite attractive to us. I think, but at the same time, we don't want to be missing out on opportunities to be investing earlier in earlier stage companies that may be farther from the clinic, but still have huge potential. So we keep a close eye out for those kind of opportunities. I think broadly speaking, kind of more platform-based companies, I think have not been as high priority for us, and I imagine other investors as well.
Yeah, I'd agree with all of those. I think for us, because we have to also, let's say, in some ways cherry pick from the wealth and the extent of the research base that we have at MGB, our bar has changed in the last year or so. I wouldn't say it's gotten higher, but it's moved. It's moved, and to pick up on things that both you guys said, it's moved far more towards assets than platforms. So really actually having something that looks like a program that can be operationalized immediately, preferring to have starting chemical matter even. I think it also has moved again into areas that are quote hot or highly de-risked. So instead of something that's a fundamental new modality, a fundamental new platform, or just a fundamental new approach to something, be it disease biology, et cetera, those are really, unfortunately, frankly, in the near term, out of vogue. I believe they'll come back in. So even for us, when we're really trying to push the newest and the greatest and the most exciting science coming out of our research base, we still actually have to put all of the filters that my colleagues just said on that in order to think about taking something forward, because at this time there just isn't the appetite for those other types of opportunities. I hope there will be again. I do think that will come. Don't ask me when.
It's
but
gonna be fine.
we have to.
That's
right.
the next
It will be
question.
fine. Right. Exactly.
gonna be
It's just.
fine.
It's just. This is the market that we're in right now. So even for our newcos, we have to take that approach as well. Where fundamentally, as a biologist, I just want to do the next cool paradigm shifting opportunity, and that's just not the environment at this moment.
As you look at the deals you are doing, how has it shifted, like how you put a deal together, whether it's syndicate construction, you mentioned stage, but also thinking about, the availability of capital to follow on. Right now, as you think about, okay, I would have done a Series A or a seed this way, but today I'm doing it another way. Not just the stage of the companies you're investing in, but really how you put the whole thing together, and how long it takes, those kinds of things. Any thoughts on that?
I mean, I think the biggest thing that we're seeing, and if you try to raise money, which is get to a meaningful value inflection point, full stop. Back when you can get to a development candidate or an IND, you're just not getting credit. And so investors aren't leaning into those types of deals where it's raise enough capital to get to the meaningful value inflection points that you can raise off of or partner off of.
Yeah, and it's certainly taking a lot longer for private companies to complete a financing round. And I think, broadly speaking, I think the sizes of the rounds may have gotten smaller. I think, I've been with Foresite for about 4.5 years now, and kind of, obviously the post-COVID boom, those days are over. So I think kind of smaller rounds to get to the meaningful value inflection point that Jason has mentioned.
Capital efficiency.
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah, I would say syndicate also, as we're battling against the want to deploy new capital into new companies, and the likelihood that all of us are facing portfolio companies who have had a much longer duration of operations than we may have anticipated, and continue to need to come back as the environment is slow to fundraise, to go back to the current investors, balancing and thinking about, do you have a syndicate that can go for the long haul in case there is this extended market dynamic where we're just going to have to continue to be asked for more capital, even from existing companies, as just the exit opportunities either are slow to reemerge or financings are slow to materialize. So even in a seed financing where you might have seen a few years ago a suite of small seed funds that are focused exclusively on that stage come together and say, terrific, let's get this started. I think we at least are starting to think about, well, do we need someone who may normally have been a later stage, potentially trying to attract that capital earlier, because even if it's a small check size for them, it potentially becomes much more meaningful for the company because it may alleviate some of the follow-on financing risks, et cetera. So trying to actually think about what that syndicate looks like over a longer time horizon than we may have over the past few years. Again, driven by the current market dynamics, not forever.
And a shameless plug from a corporate where you can have patient strategic capital, right? And so we love our institutional investor friends, but they're going to raise a new fund every 2 to 4 years, but call it every 3 years. So there's a different cycle that you need to think about, whereas we can be, as long as we're focused on patients and making progress, we can be longer term patient capital. Hashtag shameless plug.
Right, yeah, that's great. Well, patient in both forms, right? So, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that one of the things that feels very different to me about this cycle than many others is, historically, you think of strategic investors, and not just pharma, but in a lot of different sectors, strategic investors become active late in the cycle, and then the cycle peaks and comes down, and the strategic investors pull back, which is not a very good investment strategy. But it feels like in this cycle, it's actually been quite the opposite, that as some of the financial investors have pulled back, the corporates have really stepped up. And I know that Meredith has pulled together companies, not with just a corporate investor, but with 3 or 4 different corporate investors helping make the round happen. So one of the questions I get a lot is, when is it going to change? And I don't think anybody has a crystal ball here as to when it's going to change, and it seems like every year at the JP Morgan conference everybody's like, okay, this is the year it's going to change, and it hasn't yet. So rather than asking you when it's going to change, we can all say, yeah, it's a cycle, and these are sometimes short cycles and sometimes long cycles. We're in a longer cycle right now. But what is your view of the near-term environment? Like, where are we now? Are we better than we were last year, worse than we were last year, or different? And if different, so in what way?
Yeah, I'll start us off. I mean, I think there are a number of kind of overhangs that we, and everybody in the room, I'm sure, are thinking about, such as the regulatory aspects, because there are certain uncertainties.
So what do you mean by that? Joking.
That we think about, in terms of how many of the companies that do have interactions with the FDA do seem to be making progress. And on a fairly expected timeline, there are certainly hiccups that may have happened in the past, but that seem to be much more visible these days. So there's that factor, and the MFN piece also is a bit of an overhang that we're certainly keeping an eye on. And the kind of the U.S. kind of China relationship. I mean, certainly many of our portfolio companies do interact or have assets that originate from Asia and China and other countries. And how is that gonna, how that is now versus how that may change in the near future? These are kind of the main pieces that we're still, working as I'm sure all of you guys are trying to factor in.
Yeah, I'd throw in Fed rate as well.
That's
on
right.
that.
That's right. And the interest rate.
Just on your
absolutely.
right in your bulleted list.
Yeah.
Depending on what direction that goes. We saw a boom where we had a lot of generalist capital in the biotech and healthcare marketplace for a while, and then that fleed right when rates went up. So we'll see whether that also impacts maybe movement towards this. But just I think to pick up on your point about China, and I'll expand it even just more to sort of an outsource model. One of the things that I think has benefited us disproportionately, both at the company level and the investor level, is the ability to actually virtualize and outsource a significant amount of your R&D without having to put a bricks and mortar in place, at least maybe sometimes in the earliest stages, and certainly then again actually sometimes at the clinical opportunity stage. And one of my concerns is if we don't continue to have that paradigm, that's going to put a significant onus on the industry to really have high burdened dollars that will be at risk, frankly, because those efficiencies have allowed us to move faster and to do more with our companies and as an industry altogether, and I personally would like to see that continue.
I mean, you all are probably living it. Like, this is a hard time right now, full stop. There are a lot of macro aspects that have been highlighted. The piece which gives me comfort are a couple things. One, fundamentally, aging population, like what are you going to spend money on and take care of? Family, children, like there's huge unmet need that's left, and people will take care of patients. I think there's a second bucket, to me fundamentally, where if you're focused on solving unmet needs, non-incremental, right? Like there's going to be a lot of things, spec pharma, like these are going to be challenging. But if you're focused on true innovation, you look at what my parent company did with Dupixent, right? They took an atopic dermatitis market that no one thought a biologic would have an impact or could work, and created a multi-billion-dollar franchise that's making a massive difference for patients. So I think if you stick to fundamentals, unmet need, the right price, and the right team, I think it's going to be okay, right? So year to date from January 13th to now, my count is 20 greater than $1 billion acquisitions from pharma. You look at the loss of exclusivities that are happening, the innovation happens in this room, in Boston, in Europe, the West Coast, but this is where the innovation's happening, and this is where a huge part, John Reed was on the stage earlier, a huge portion of big pharmas, the Sanofis, J&Js, are coming from amazing biotechs and entrepreneurs here. And that is not going to change, even with the macro pressures coming on.
Great. So I'm going to get to some questions in a minute, but I'll give you all a chance to ask one question that is, I'm sure, in a lot of people's minds, because it typically is in a panel like this, which is, okay, I'm an entrepreneur, I'm an academic, I have an idea. How do I get access to you? How should we approach you? What is an effective strategy to say, okay, I need to raise money and talk to your fund? So just what works, and what are the best ways to do this, and what are some ways that people try? Like, I'm not a big elevator pitch guy; it doesn't work for me, but others may feel differently. So just how do people access you and sort of say, hey, if I'm raising money, here's a good strategy?
I mean, you set up a fund at Mass General Brigham and have an amazing team, and they can make warm introductions.
Yeah, I was just going to say, if you're an MGB person, you can literally just find me in the address book and send me an email and say what Roger just said. I have a cool idea, let's talk. Jokes aside, for us, We want to engage with the research community early and often, even if something is far from, at the stage of venture financing. That, we actually have, Jason talked about patient capital, we are patient for data, meaning that, we can watch something mature for years on end. One of the companies that we invested in, the first time I sat down with that PI was about 6 years ago, and we financed that company just 2 years ago. But we watched for 4 years of that platform and that program mature. So outreach early and often for us, but again, only if you're from MGB. I'd love to hear about other stuff, but but that is outside of our mandate. So I'll turn it over to you guys who, right.
Two very simple things. One, warm intros. Find someone within your network that knows you, likes you, whatever it is, that can make a warm intro. Huge difference. The second is, I spent some time outside of work raising money in the not-for-profit world on the education side. And in that world, we have a saying which is, if you ask for money, you're going to get advice, whereas if you ask for advice, you're going to get money. I think that is a direct correlation to venture fundraising. So don't go and pitch an idea. Go and ask a question. Hey, how do you think about this trial, or how do you think about this unmet need? But go and engage in an honest, genuine way around advice. You're more likely to get money from these guys.
And I completely agree with Jason. So before I joined Foresite, I was on faculty at Yale for about 12 years as an academic cardiologist. And the only successful VC interaction I had that led to seed funding was through a warm intro. I've reached out a number of other times, I've had discussions, but none of those materialized into financing. So I think that does make a key difference. Just because we get inundated with so many inbound interest from people we don't know, and oftentimes just don't have the bandwidth to go through each deck that gets sent over to us. So.
Yeah, I mean, venture really is people and networks more than it is actually the dollars. And so I feel like I kind of can't emphasize enough that moving through networks and getting into a network, both as an entrepreneur into VC and then venture to venture, is really where most of the warm intros, as well as also the opportunities, flow from, far more than cold calls and post-panel cornerings, shall we say.
Exactly. Reminder that people can submit questions on the app, and we've actually gotten quite a few, so I'll just jump in with some of those. And the first one...
Raise your hand. Can we raise your hand?
You can also
Old
raise
school,
your hand.
technology. Sorry.
Somebody
I
can bring a
apologize.
mic.
The iPad is what you should do.
This way I can group them a little bit too. So one of the questions, and I think this is probably more for Jason, but it really affects all of us because everybody has a portfolio, which is, how do you assess startups that might challenge your competitive moat while also presenting attractive investment opportunity?
Sorry, say it again?
How do you look at things which are competitive with stuff that's already in your portfolio or that's competitive to what you're already doing?
I mean, look, ultimately, very few funds are going to double down in the same pathway in the same area, but we've made bets in similar spaces around. We fundamentally believe in an indication. Pick an I&I indication, a neurodegenerative indication, absolutely no problem making multiple bets because, look, biotech is hard. Like, this is hard work. I mean, you've seen the numbers from McKinsey of the attrition of how you go from preclinical to a marketed drug and the percent you're going to succeed. So ultimately, we are okay taking multiple bets along a pathway, et cetera, but we typically want to find the winner that we believe, and so we will be careful with how we do that. But yeah, I mean, again, not to make this distill it to something simple, but we're just focused on the patient. And if we can get things into patients that make a difference at the right prices with the right teams, all of this stuff can work out. Right.
Yeah, I'm similar on our side as well. I mean, we probably would not make two bets on like something like small molecule GLP-1 agonist. But broadly in the obesity space, I mean, there are different targets and different modalities that we may make multiple bets on. So yeah, I mean, certainly I think depends on the indication, depends on the pathways and so on.
So next question is, given the environment and how hard it is to get venture funding right now, particularly for really early stage companies, what do you think about angel funds and angel groups and angel investors as a way to get started? Is that something that's useful, or is it something that, given how it can mess up the cap table or valuations or those kinds of things, you tend to shy away from when you see those?
Well, you point out two things I'd be concerned about, Roger, which is I think angels, particularly in this time, can be terrific. They can be a way to at least nucleate the company, but you do have to make sure that those angels either have enough experience and expertise that they actually understand the investments that they are getting into. Will not actually ultimately be problematic if the venture funds come in and they need to do things like reprice or change how the company is even just set up and running at the board level, et cetera. And so really, I think it's an opportunity right now for angel investors to be more active with the caveats that sometimes we see issues with valuations, issues with ownership, et cetera, that can be problematic when venture does come in. So making sure that you're balancing that. Everybody wants a very, very high pre-money, and that can be very exciting, but that ultimately, and we've seen this sometimes with angels where they may be more flexible on that for various reasons. We've also seen that, be problematic when VCs come in and do not agree with that pricing structure and need to change it. And that oftentimes then, instead of being problematic for company because they don't want to take that price, it's also problematic for investors. We face that too on the VC side. Let me be clear, it's not all angels, right? We also don't always price things appropriately, but I would say that's a big thing to just watch out for and understand what that pricing framework needs to be in those earliest stages.
Yeah, and I certainly agree with everything Meredith just laid out. But at the same time, if you're trying to gain traction from VC funds and you haven't had much success, and if you do talk to angel funds and they do show an interest and you can get to a meaningful milestone with that angel fund that will potentially attract the VCs that may have turned you down in the first place, I think that could be an interesting setup.
Great, thanks. So this one must be a plant from somebody from Foresite, because it's only asking Jason and Meredith to give a failure example.
I saw him on his phone a second ago. I mean, how long do you have?
Yeah, exactly. Do you want to go first? Or do you want me to go first? A failure example. So I'll actually give two, coming back to one where we do a fair amount of new co-creation work. And there's a technology and platform that I have to say, I saw 5 years ago, and I still think could be a fundamental new paradigm. But it happens to be in immunotherapy, and specifically cancer immunotherapy. And there isn't a pivot to autoimmune. And we have, been pushing on this for a really long time. And the market has just not been on our side. And so it has not yet failed because it's still sitting on the sidelines waiting, but it has been many, many years waiting for that place to warm back up so that we actually could bring that out. So that's one type of failure that I think we have, where we just have something that is ready, maybe for funding, but the market is not ready for it. And then, I'll talk about another company where, we had a really terrific venture thesis, would have been a best-in-class asset, and it was real safe in the clinic. It was safe. So unfortunately, it just did not recapitulate the initial biology that we thought. And so there it was, in fact, a clinical failure, which is always disappointing, but when you're trying to do something that is a novel target, a novel modality, et cetera, that no one else has done before, what Jason was saying with the McKinsey attrition, the risk for us is incredibly high because we are really trying to do completely novel things that have not been done before. We were fortunate that that company actually had some backup indications and drug and was able to actually pivot. And those trials are actually going quite well now in an open label extension. So we're hopeful that it's not going to be a true, in all matter of words, failure, but one where we were, unfortunately, the first investment thesis didn't work out, but we're hoping to pivot and transition to a new one.
And I'm assuming that will not be an up round when that happens.
Look, I fail a lot, right? And if you're not failing in biotech, you're probably not taking the right risks. So failure is okay. You should embrace it. The failures that I would maybe point to is when in a company or we have a thesis and we say, oh, we can change this. So we have a question about a management team or a person. We say, well, it's going to be fine. So I would say, bigger failures have been knowing that a change needed to happen and not making it at the time when you thought you needed to make it. But failure in biotech, like, again, if you're not failing, you're not taking risk, and you should be shouldn't be in this job.
All right, now one specifically for Hyung, which
Thank you.
may or may not cause.
Robbie, can you make some plants here?
It may or may not cause a little bit of strife on the panel, but here we go. So as an institutional investor, what do you see as the pros and cons of having a strategic corporate investor on the cap table?
You're surrounded, right?
As long as they ultimately acquire the company. I think we work with multiple groups, both institutional and the Sanofis and like, so we're very happy to join a syndicate. Sometimes we lead rounds, we participate as a syndicate, and we're pretty broadly open-minded in terms of who we work with. Love to have others who do as much deep diligence as we do, and oftentimes. Jason and others, do that. So yeah, I don't think overall we have much preference for one or the other. Yeah.
Great, thanks. So I'll pivot back to one of my questions, which is to talk a little bit about the competitive environment and, specifically what you're seeing as far as like competition from China, which seems to be, if you went back 2 or 3 years, you didn't see a lot of major international pharmaceutical companies doing major deals with Chinese assets, and they seem to be doing that a lot now. And maybe talk about, has that shifted your investment thesis at all? Is that real, or is that my imagination? Just talk about a little bit of international competition, maybe from some places that it wasn't there until the last few years.
I can start us off. Certainly we do look at assets out of Asia very carefully and very closely. And there are multiple assets that we may be looking at closely that look like they could potentially have the potential to be best in class. And what we realize sometimes is that the strategics are looking at the same asset, and then that company might go radio silent for a few weeks, and then a few weeks later you see the big announcement, so-and-so paid up $200 million for this preclinical asset. So I think the competition landscape has definitely changed. Even in that setting, we have been able to get some China out-licensing companies formed and deals done. A couple examples recently, Alumis is a company that's now publicly traded that this was about 4 years, 3.5, 4 years ago, that we were able to bring in an asset from a TYK2 inhibitor from China, that we incubated a company within Foresite, and more recent example being Candid Therapeutics, where we brought in T-cell engager into a new company with 2 different clinical stage Chinese originated assets. So certainly landscape is changing, but at the same time, I think we are still very active in looking at these kind of opportunities.
Thanks. It's real. It's here, and if you're not thinking about it in the same way that AI is here, right? But I would say this is not new, right? China has been, and Asia has been relevant for the past decade in terms of the shift from just focus on Me Too's to moving more quickly, novel chemical equity. And so, again, we have several portfolio companies and my parent company that has been thinking about because it comes down to how do you find the best molecule at the latest stage that can get into patients and show a difference. And so I think it's here. I think it's here to stay. And it's something that I think what's interesting is venture funds are realizing as the capital markets have become tougher, specifically in China, there are more opportunities and willingness to out-license not just the China for China, but China for global, which I think has not been as prevalent as it was a decade ago.
Thanks. And then we've got literally a minute left, so maybe a couple of seconds for each of you. You mentioned AI. That's the first time AI has come up on this panel. Is that impacting your investment strategy at all, or how you make investments?
Yes.
Yes.
You said we had a minute. How long?
Right. Not yet.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's definitely a productivity tool for us. I mean, we're looking at things where to pull data sets together that used to take 2 people with a PhD 2 weeks, we can do it in 10 minutes, you know, with a tool that's not very expensive. So we haven't made a lot of AI-specific bets, but it certainly has helped us with our diligence process in certain areas.
Yeah. And from Foresite perspective, we're one of the founding investors of Zera, and you know, I think kind of these next generation AI-based drug development companies, you know, I mean, still early in their, you know, in their incubation, but, you know, hopefully those will pan out faster and better drugs.
So thank you, everyone. Thank you for coming, and thanks for the great questions. Thanks to the panelists. And I also have a note here asking you to, in consideration of the future panels, please throw your trash out in the back. But thank you, everyone, so much.